We're going to talk about freedom from fear. People have all kinds of fear. Fear of death, fear of illness, fear of losing loved ones, fear of losing a job, fear of loneliness, all sorts of fears. So when these people have, and so what people would normally resort to would be that they would be going and going to temples, offering pujas, doing special, maybe some special rituals which have been suggested by maybe an astrologer. Maybe they go to a counselor, or maybe they may even go. They could go to a counselor and get some help, thinking that something is going wrong with them. And how do they come to terms with this fear? And this is an overwhelming thing for them. So what would they do? So all these things that people do, would they be? Would Sri J. Krishnamurti be very dismissive of all that, or would he not give any credence to all that?
It's, I think, more important for us to see from our own perspective and clear thinking what is wrong with these approaches of resorting to the succor and solace that traditional religions are offering, that religious authorities are offering, and that even the counselors are offering. Now, the counseling thing is a new door which has been opened in the West, essentially in a society where religion is broken down. In India, we don't have that counseling so much, but we have a lot of solace and succor coming from traditional religions, pujas, mantra japa, and so on. Now, where actually is the malaise? Now, fear is happening in consciousness. It's happening here in that theater, which is a very subtle and invisible theater. And actually, we have not addressed the malaise in the ground in which it is transpiring. Instead, we have a belief system centered on the gods and the deities and blessings, which leads us to think that if we do these pujas and if we do this mantra japa and all of that, then somehow by magic the fear will vanish. Now, that's a very childish belief system which we have got, and so long as we have that belief system, I think we can make no headway in understanding fear and understanding its origins and how to deal with it. So Krishnamurti is asking us to deal with it directly in the theater of consciousness where it's happening, and for that we'll have to walk away from the traditional succor and the traditional solace which the religions are offering and which society is offering, and come into ourselves. And this seems to be a difficult thing for man, and that's where the solution will be discovered.
Yeah. So actually, who has this fear? When we say he has this fear, I mean, who has this fear? How to identify that identity? And what is this? What is our connection to that entity?
I mean, we shouldn't make a mystery of the whole thing, but you know that we use the ordinary pronoun. You have that fear, I have that fear, but we don't really know who this you is and who this I is. There is a mystery there, and the I is enshrouded in a mystery and the you is enshrouded in a mystery, and we've got to crack that mystery. Now, this is called the self by the world teacher Krishnamurti, and we have got to get a direct experience of who we are, and we do get that experience when we enter into self-knowing in a very serious way. Then it's a certain formation in the flowing river of consciousness, a certain formation much like a vortex or the vortices which form when the Ganga river is flowing. It's a repetitive moment in a certain spot without making any contribution to the actual movement. a very localized, repetitive moment. And that's the self, and one has to understand the formation of the self and why it is creating all these problems, and that's the door that Krishnamurti has opened.
So are there any other synonyms for this self? I mean, self is what Krishnamurti has called it. So are there any other synonyms for the self that what we could perhaps understand it even better?
In the Krishnamurtian literature and in the public talks of the master, we find other usages of the master Krishnamurti. For example, sometimes he uses the word observer, which I see is quite an apt description of the self. Then he uses the word thinker. Then he uses the word censor. Somebody who is censoring, who is editing, and who is manipulating, and who is controller. And these are the words that Krishnamurti uses. But if you come to the traditional religious literature of India, then you find that the correct name for this whole phenomenon, the dynamical phenomenon of the self, the name is Jivatma. That's the correct name.
Okay. Now, since we were talking about fear, I've read the death experience of Sri Ramana Maharishi. Now, he was a 16-year-old boy who was suddenly overcome with this fear of death.
Right.
I mean, in a situation where he was not having any ill health or anything, but he kind of his reaction to that is so very different from what we have spoken about now. His reaction to that was something so unique that he was transported straight away from that frightened, fearful 16-year-old, and he just landed on the what should we say, a lap of the divine, that he landed into self-realization. Okay, I mean, all of us had to labor through for a long time to reach that level, if ever. But I'm just saying that happened that way. I mean, he dramatized it by lying flat on the bed and lying still as if his body was had rigor mortis, and he said, then he started asking these questions as to who was it that had died, and what had died, and there starts all his enquiry. And then he came to this realization that the body, the physical body, dies, but there's another entity which is alive and continues to live all the time. So maybe you can, and I think it's maybe we should see the interdisciplinary what shall we say, area between Ramana Maharishi's teachings and Krishnamurti's teachings.
Yes, actually we have done that in the year 2021 in July, when we had a very interesting webinar in which we raised a very disturbing question that when death is almost at the doorstep of a large section of humanity, why is it that humanity is not actually grappling with the question of death per se? That was the whole theme of the webinar. And then we discussed in that webinar Krishnamurti's death experience and Ramana Maharshi's experience of the fear of death. And we dealt with this at great length as to how the 16-year-old boy Ramana, he showed extraordinary mastery in self-knowing, consummate mastery, so that by paying attention to the what is, in Krishnamurti's sense, he was straight away shot into the open skies of self-realization. We dealt with it. It's rather involved, the whole thing, so we can't go into it here. But that is definitely an interdisciplinary area where Ramana Maharshi is giving an example to the entire world of people who want to understand Krishnamurti, how to deal with very tormenting and very scary what is. It's for the whole world to study that, to go back to the Maharshi's experience and to see it in the light of Krishnamurti's work.
Yeah.